I think we're getting to a pretty full room, so I'd like to say hello. My name is Celine Coggins. I'm the Executive Director of Grantmakers for Education, and I believe right now we are entering our 5th month, number 1 of COVID with no end in sight, so that's the bad news. But the good news is it's our 5th month working together as a group on out-of-school time issues in this growing and I think deepening community. So really excited to be a part of it, really excited that GFE can be a platform for this work, really grateful to Kathleen who has been coordinating it for us and for all of the folks who have been involved. So that's me. I'd like to now turn things over to Alexis Lamas from the SD Bechtel Jr. Foundation to kick us off for today.
Terrific. Thanks, Celine. And thanks everyone for having me. Happy Friday. I'm delighted to act as a moderator today for a conversation with 3 incredible experts and leaders in out-of-school time and the after-school field. And to just set a bit of context for today's conversation, as Celine mentioned, I work at the Stephen Bechtel Jr. Foundation on our out-of-school time character initiative. And as some of you know, our foundation, driven by a sense of urgency to address the issues facing young people sooner rather than later, decided to spend down all of its assets over a 10-year period, ending in December of this year. In 2016, our foundation began making the character initiatives multi-year, multi-million-dollar capacity building grants to some of the largest youth-serving organizations and national intermediaries in the country. And over the last 4 years and nearly $130 million, we've sought to support our grantees to tackle field-wide issues in workforce development, connecting the dots across research, practice, and policy, and investing in frontline leadership who are often directly of and from the communities they serve. As the foundation prepares to sunset at the end of this year, our goal is to ensure that our investments strengthen the fields in which we work and that we will be exiting. 2 years ago, with limited time and funds remaining, we felt that investments in grantees' capacity to navigate issues of equity would be responsive to some of the most salient issues facing out-of-school time practitioners and organizations. With our grantees, the foundation began exploring equity, both in the field of education and youth development, as well as internally within our organizations. And in this journey, we've been very humbled to work with incredible partners like the National Afterschool Association, who leverage their national influence, proximity to practitioners and their communities, as well as decades of experience in field and leadership development. Today, we have the exciting opportunity to hear about how NAA has focused intentionally and effectively on building a leadership pipeline for people of color in the out-of-school time field. Please join me in welcoming Gina Warner, President and CEO of the National Afterschool Association, Christina Russell, Managing Director with the Policy Study Associates, and Jimena Quiroga, Hopkins, founder and principal of the Thrive Paradigm. Before we begin, just a couple of quick logistics. In the chat, you'll find the link to our group notes /whiteboard. Please feel free to take notes throughout today's session. And also you'll notice that there's a table to sign up for breakout group discussions. In the second half of today's session, you'll have the opportunity to talk with one of our panelists and each other in small groups. So be sure to sign up for a topic either now or in the next 20 minutes as you hear from each of our speakers. And if you're not sure which you'd like to attend, we can help or we can choose one for you. And lastly, let our tech hosts, Hannah or Jesse, know if you need anything tech-wise or have any difficulty getting into our whiteboard or group document. They will be helping us sort into breakout groups later, so let them know earlier rather than when it's too late. All right, and with that, I'll turn it over to Gina to give us some insight into the challenges NAA saw and continues to see and the strategies they've employed to support leaders of color in the last year.
So thank you, Alexis. I'm glad to be with you all this morning. My name is Gina Warner. I'm the president of the National Afterschool Association. We represent over 36,000 after-school professionals around the country. And through our work as the professional member association of the field, we are really focusing on the role and importance of the adults in the lives of children and positive impacts that they can make. And so I thought I'd take this back a step because I think it's an interesting conversation of how our members really influenced our staff and our leadership, our board of directors in thinking about this. So about 5 years ago, our NAA board of directors committed to focusing on leaders in the field, deciding that that would be a way for us to have the greatest amount of impact. And so we created, I guess, almost like a mini logic model that if we invested in building strong leaders, they would create strong teams who would run strong programs, who would strong programs that would positively impact young people. So that was kind of the like I said, the mini sort of logic model that we put in place. And so we began to think, what would that look like to invest in leaders? And so without, a large investment, we looked at some revenue neutral things that we could do. We began with recognition programs. And I will say we were defining leadership broadly. We looked at emerging leaders. And so we started our next generation of after school leaders initiative. We looked at recognizing established leaders in our field through our most influential awards. We created some targeted communications that really provided articles and resources and tools directed strictly at leaders. And we looked at maybe at the time what we saw as some barriers to leadership progression and growth. We looked at issues in the field around retirement and succession planning. But we realized, even with all these efforts, that we really weren't getting to the issues that we needed, which, to Alexis's point, was really creating a leadership pipeline so that we were growing and developing leaders who were reflective of the community they served. We really believe that that is such an important asset of the field of after school, is that so often we are reflective of and working so closely in the communities where we are. So we realized that this wasn't going to happen by chance. It certainly wasn't going to happen as quickly as we wanted it to. So we needed to be really intentional about it. We were very fortunate that within our NAA network, our California affiliate, CalSAC, had been doing some tremendous work over the years through their Leadership Diversity Initiative. So we began conversations with them. At the same time, we were having conversations with Alexis and Rebecca and the team at Bechtel. And I just appreciate so much, I'll say, as a program leader, a funder who's just really open to hearing about what our journey had been, and just really opening to hear about, how we were thinking about it and addressing it. And so really, I think, and Bechtel had been funding the work, the CalSAC work, we thought, what would it take to take this work to scale, to make this work as big and as urgent, as we needed it to be. So very fortunate to have the investment from Bechtel to really build on the work that CalSAC had been doing. Step one was we realized that we needed to know what we knew, what we didn't know from a research perspective, do a landscape assessment of what leadership looked like in the field of after school. And so brought in our colleagues at Policy Study Associates. And so we have Christina Russell on the phone with us today. So I'm going to turn it over to Christina to talk about that landscape assessment and what the data told us about this work.
Thank you, Gina. Good morning, everyone. I'm Christina Russell with Policy Studies Associates. We're a research and evaluation and capacity building organization based in DC, and we've worked nationally in the field of out-of-school time for several decades. And so we were honored to be invited to join in this project, and as Gina said, to really support by doing some initial background research, landscape analysis to understand what's known about leadership and after school, and particularly the equity and equity gaps in leadership for emerging leaders of color, and to see also what needs to be known more in after school. And I think as I will go through some of our top level findings, that's something that I want to highlight more, is that there's a lot that's unknown still. And so we did a landscape analysis. The report's available through NAA. And we really looked at the research that's been done in out-of-school time, but we also drew on work from the nonprofit field and education field more broadly. So one piece that I will start by highlighting, and Alexis and Gina both alluded to this, is that there's really no clear pathway or leadership pipeline in after-school. And NAA has been doing work to professionalize the after-school field for several decades, and a lot of effort has put into that. But there's still a lack of a clarity, a lack of a clear path of what positions and how to move forward with those positions as a field. After school, as many of us know, the out of school time field really runs on passion. Brings together staff who are really passionate about their work, who want to improve the lives of youth in their communities. And there's low pay, there's not a clear pathway to leadership or to financial security in OST. Part of that is that when we look at the research, the career growth is often happening through social networks and through connections, understanding who you know within organizations, where you can identify a path, where you can identify a position that's coming open. There's some inconsistent roles and organizational structures across organizations. It's a very organic field. So that's, for example, unlike in the education field where there's a little bit more of a clear stepwise progression that if you're interested in leadership, you might be able to take from teacher to teacher leadership position to other roles within your school or within your district. Another issue is that there's few leadership positions that are available, just the nature, a bit of a pyramid in leadership available in out of school time, and quite honestly little turnover in those leadership positions. So there hasn't been a whole lot of opportunity within the field to take on those positions when they are available. And that's something that's reflected in the broader nonprofit field, particularly within human services sector in general, when we look at the research from there. And then finally, the low pay within after school that remains a challenge and is a bit of a disincentive to stay in the field. So why does this matter? Why am I talking about the leadership pipeline? Part of that, this social capital is unequally distributed, and that's perpetuating a lot of the inequities for who you know within the field, who you have opportunities to. Do you know how to navigate those networks and those systems to understand how to progress in OST, how to find those leadership positions? And we also know that that lack of a pipeline and pathway for financial stability is especially amplified for the aspiring leaders of color. A few things that can be done that we've seen emerging in OST, but also in nonprofit in general, is really think about intentional mentoring, acknowledging that social capital role and thinking about who's going to be the mentor, who's going to show the way to navigate this system and this sector, as well as being systematic in human resources processes, being really intentional about being attentive to equity issues, to diversity issues, and really thinking, as Gina mentioned, the importance of having staff and having leaders who reflect the youth who are served. So a lot of those issues are really address OST issue as a field, as a sector. But we know that there's also clear disparities in that access to leadership. One thing I'll highlight is that there's few data that are really available on the demographics of the field. And this is something that I think is important when we think about measuring what we value, that there's not systematic data on who after-school professionals are or who the after-school leaders are. For this project, NAA launched a survey that occurred in fall 2019 over 3 weeks. It was sent to membership, some snowball sampling. And I also want to acknowledge that our colleagues at Public Profit played a big role in both developing and analyzing this survey. And over those 3 weeks, NAA received more than 2,300 responses from staff representing all 50 states and DC. Said, we're not sure how representative these data are, but it's a good start at understanding what the landscape of the field is. And I think some of these disparities that we've known about anecdotally, that we've all seen in the field, I think we're coming through in those data. So of the staff who responded, 39% of respondents who were frontline staff, so serving youth directly, working with them in programs, were people of color. That decreased to 34% of program leaders, also known as site directors, and down to 31% in executive leaders. When we looked at the few other studies that we were able to find on these leaderships, I think those findings and those disparities were even greater. There was a study in a national youth organization where 67% of frontline staff were people of color, 58% at site directors, and then that dropped down to 34% of executive directors. And that's also highlighted throughout the nonprofit field. One thing I want to emphasize is that that's not, those disparities happen despite a lack of gap in experience and aspirations. In our sample, a greater proportion of the respondents of color had graduate degrees. Both respondents of color and white respondents had more than 10 years experience in OST on average. And despite that, we were seeing those differences. Again, this is something that we're seeing in the nonprofit field generally. So I'm going to turn this over to Jimena to talk about how the professional leader community that she was helping to moderate was looking to address these issues. But before I do that, I just wanted to leave the group with what thought of Jimena is going to be talking about this group that brought together leaders within OST. I think the literature is also showing that this isn't an issue that can be resolved just through professional development or through training as we typically think about it. It's really pointing to kind of systemic challenges and barriers with access to leadership and really thinking about how to support leaders in better navigating systems. There's not necessarily a skill gap, but there's a real access gap. And the other piece is that we do need to invest more in data to better understand the pipeline to be able to understand where those gaps are occurring to support staff in OST as they move on to leadership positions.
Great, thank you, Christina. I'm going to go ahead and share a slide deck just because I'm a visual thinker. So hopefully this will be helpful for some of you. I know I really need some visuals. So actually, if I could have access to share, if it's possible. Okay, so just to give a little context also, again, I know Gina mentioned this just a little bit. The Building Capacity for Leaders of Color initiative really encompassed a couple of different components. And so this professional learning community is one of them. What Christina just spoke to was really around the field research and report that was conducted. And then we also had a pretty big social media campaign to update a lot of the membership data that NA already collects to really include some of that demographic data that we're talking about has really been lacking. And then we also did some surveys and did some interviews just to gather more information around needs around leadership development for leaders of color. So I'll be speaking a little bit just around this professional learning community for leaders of color and give some context here. So as Christina mentioned, the need that we're really trying to address here is, obviously what we're talking about just in terms of the racial leadership gap when it comes to leadership, and also understanding, just echoing what Christina said, that a lot of the challenges and the barriers that are in the way for leaders of color and emerging leaders of color really have to do with structural and systemic issues, lack of social capital and things of that nature, much more so than skill building. And so given that, we really wanted to address that specific need and build off of the work that CalSAC, the California School Age Consortium, has really been doing, as Gina mentioned earlier, really for the past decade with their leadership development Institute Fellowship. And so that is actually a very, very comprehensive fellowship that runs for a whole year. And they've had several different cohorts. I think they have over 100 folks who have graduated from that to date, and are more and more getting requests to really bring that kind of model into other national kind of spaces because it's been proven very effective. So building off of that, we really wanted to design something that would help to address the need. So just briefly, really, I think our North Star and our goal really for this community practice is to ensure that leaders of color are equity-driven change agents. And that's really, really the central goal. Each session is really designed to strengthen skills, explore dynamics around power, privilege, and oppression, and provide a space for folks to really build community with one another, because we know that that's definitely one thing that folks have been wanting, and we've been hearing that is very, very needed. And then specifically, the things that we get into in terms of objectives for folks in this particular PLC is helping them to engage in some really, really deep self-reflection and examination around what it really means to be a person of color and navigate systems within our field. We also help them deepen their equity analysis and what that means, and really becoming, sometimes depending on the role, more of a systems thinker and understanding the role of equity within systems thinking, exploring power, privilege, and oppression and how it impacts them. And again, just the network piece and building community. So those are really the main components, objectives for the PLC. Again, highlighting community, leadership management competencies, and really the through line being this equity piece that really runs through everything that we do. Another element that's really important just in terms of the frameworks that we use, our approach is really to leadership, is that it starts with the leadership self and then it ripples out. And so that's something, again, another through line through everything that we're doing comes back to the self, a lot of self-awareness, and self-reflection, and how that really impacts how we lead others and how we then move our organizations and then more broadly communities and movements to shift. And then the other framework that we've been using is really around the 3 Ps of again, just holding up the mirror, doing the self-work, and then figuring out how that fits into shifting practices within our organization. So again, depending on the role of folks that are participating in the PLC, this could mean shifting practices at a point of service level, and then looking at policies. So this is all the internal work within the organization, and to the degree that folks have positional power to really inform that, how can everything that they're getting from the PLC really help to inform some changes and shifts within the policies in their organizations. So I'll talk a little bit about the structure now. We did have a 2-day in-person meeting that we had scheduled for, that was going to be happening at the NAA convention. Of course, we had to move that virtual due to COVID, so that didn't happen. So what we've shifted to, the redesign has been to do 5 virtual 4-hour sessions, and we meet on a monthly basis. Folks get readings and assignments to do between sessions, and also they're able to develop a leadership development plan, which really has all the layers that I just discussed in terms of their own personal goals and also organizational goals. And we were hoping to have a closing session that was going to be in person, and really in the hopes to be able to meet in person, but it's really looking that's not going to happen either. So we're probably going to be doing some kind of closing session that will also be virtual at this point. And that's in September. Right now we are, I'll show you the timeline in a minute. So right now we've just completed our 4th session, and we're about to have our 5th session. So we're really nearing the end. Folks are really right now in the space of trying to finalize what their leadership development plans are. So a lot of the information that they've been getting through the sessions has really been informing the development of that plan. And we'll be talking about, they're going to be presenting all their plans to one another at the September closing session. The last thing I'll say here, or one of the last things I'll say here, is just giving you a sense of some of the topics that we're covering. And so the content was really organized in a sequence that really best supports the group and the format. So we had, obviously less time than what the original model really needs, but I think we were still able to really building something that that really offer depth for folks in the ability to kind of go deep with some of these topics that can be really kind of challenging and require a lot of time to grapple with. And one thing I'll say just around the application process really briefly is we, due to budget constraints mainly, we had 12 slots that we wanted to fill. We also wanted to make sure that we had a small enough group that was intimate. So we had 12 slots, and we knew that this was going to be, folks were really going to be responding well to this, but we did not know and anticipate that we were going to be getting 300 applications from across the nation, which is what we got. So very, I think, much confirms the need for this kind of space for leaders of color. And just wanted to share just a few reflections from individuals who have been participating in this. And I'll just put those up so you all can read them. I feel like so far one of the things that's been really clear is that just folks being able to build community very quickly in ways that even for me have been surprising due to the fact that it's all virtual. but I think it's also affirming of just the need of folks wanting this kind of space. And I'll just share one more reflection. And the last thing I'll share is just a few takeaways that I think so far have really started to emerge for us doing this PLC. As I just mentioned, participants feeling really connected. And I think that just speaks again to just the real deep desire to be in community with other leaders of color, really talking and grappling about these issues. I think that really kind of helps to speed up the process of that community building aspect. The other thing is that we're seeing participants applying a lot of the tools and strategies in real time. So that's been really exciting. Just folks saying, you know, I have a meeting tomorrow with my district and I'm going to take this and I want to apply it. I want to start using this tomorrow. So that's been great. And then the last thing is that also just participants really valuing the time for self-reflection and personal exploration. I feel like just that, you know, by and large, I think is just in professional spaces, that's not something that is normalized very much. And so for them to really sometimes for the first time be able to kind of engage in that space has been really, really valuable is what we're hearing. Okay, so I'll pause that there. Great.
All right. Thank you so much, Gina, Christina, and Jimena for sharing those insights and updates on your work. So much of what you all spoke to me personally as an after-school site director of 9 years before coming to the foundation. And so much of that, like in fact, I'm hearing part of the reason why I'm no longer in after school is for some of those reasons, quite honestly. And I'm so happy and honored to be a part of this work. All right. Thanks, everyone. And to close it out before handing it over to Kathleen to talk a little bit more about next steps for our OSD impact group, I wanted to give Gina Warner a moment, a few minutes just to share any final reflections and some key takeaways that if the only thing you took away from this meeting was this next 5 minutes, Gina, what would you like to say?
Okay, well, thank you, Alexis. The first thing I want to say is that all of you on this call are in this work and you're on this call because you believe in equity of opportunity for young people. I want you to commit to a belief in equity of opportunity for the adults who work with these young people, particularly those of color. Number two, I want you to bring to this work a spirit of doing work with your community, not to your community. I thank someone in my small group for that, for reminding me of that, because I think that's such an important attitude to bring to this work. And thirdly, I want you to remember that this work is not going to happen by chance. It might, but you know, we frankly don't have that much time. And I think it's a moral imperative that we act on this sooner rather than later, that we act on this with intentionality. So those are my three. I guess I have a fourth one because it was kind of leads to like what the next steps of this work look like for us. Just that everyone remember that this work is big and it's also small. You know, we have visions and desires to continue with these PLCs. We are discussing train the trainer models, coaching. If you have work going on in your community that we'd be able to leadership work, we'd be able to offer coaching around, particularly around leaders of color. So there's big, important work that needs to be done. I mean, remember the more than 300 people who won these 12 slots. It's exciting and empowering and heartbreaking at the same time. But this work is also small and it's everyday actions. And you all have tremendous positions of power and influence. How can you use those within your organizations to ask the right questions, to give the support, and to continue to push these issues forward, you know, among your colleagues. So I guess those are my 4 takeaways that I hope people will remember from the call.
Thank you so much, Gina. And if folks have access to their Zoom reactions, I hope you can join me either on camera or through the Zoom reaction to give them a round of applause or a thumbs up. Love it. And I'm going to hand it over to Kathleen to close us out.
Great. Thank you, Alexis. I know that everyone on the call is thinking like, how am I getting Alexis to facilitate my next call? Because you do it in the best, like, calm, unhurried, graceful, like I'm feeling like the rest of my day is going to be super productive because you've set us on a good mindset and mental note. So thank you for doing that. And thank you to our group of amazing speakers as well. I want to give a special shout out to Gina because she's calling from vacation. I was wondering whether I should out you for that, but we asked you to do it and you did, and I'm really glad. So we are going to continue this conversation. We will follow up with everybody with the deck and also make sure that you have contact information for the speakers on our call. I think that it's super important what Gina said about big and small, because if you're grant making in this space, then there is a role for you to play. Many of you are already playing it, but there's so many things that came up on this call today where we can focus in and we can amplify and elevate and begin to scale the work. So super exciting. As far as the GFE OST Impact Group, thank you. I think this is actually our 10th call. So thank you for those of you who have been with us since mid-March in these. We will continue. The next thing we're going to do is part of the GFE conference that's coming up. So for those of you who are funders and GFE members, check out the GFE website, sign up for the conference, and then attend our August 3rd session, where we're going to be talking to the leaders of Big Thought in Dallas and Youth Prize in Minnesota, and with also accompanying young people. And we're going to dig into how they are essentially leveraging the groundwork that they've built and the work that they do to center their conversations in the race equity conversations that their communities are having. And so please try to join us for that. And then after that, we will pick up these sessions again. So you'll get an email from GFE about when the next one is. And we're always looking for ideas from you for topics and for speakers. So feel free to respond to our emails and let us know that. And I'm really excited to continue the work. And thank you all. It's good to see you. And have a great weekend.
Who are not members are able to join the conference as well. So check it out.
Yes.
Hannah put the information in the chat box.
That's true. And if you actually are a funder that's not a GFE member, I will say that it would be good if you became a GFE member. So there's information about that on the website too. So thank you. Have a great weekend, everybody.